Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I am your host, guiding you through cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but have left the public divided. These are not your typical cut and dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may be clear, but the truth? Well, that's another story. Now picture this. An elderly woman isolated in her hospital room. Her health is failing. She's feeling vulnerable and alone. She's barely able to navigate the swirling confusion and pain around her. And yet, she's faced with an unthinkable situation. The people she should be able to trust the most, her own family, are pressuring her to change the very legacy she spent her entire life building. This was not just a betrayal. This was an assault on her dignity, her autonomy, and everything she stood for. Today's case is the story of Anna Sarconi and the man who was supposed to protect her, her own son, William. Instead, William exploited her compromised state, manipulating her to change her will in his favor. And this wasn't an anonymous act of deception. It was a deeply personal violation. Anna's granddaughter, Margie Ann, was Anna's original heir. But William's undue influence changed that, cutting Margie Ann out of the inheritance she had been promised. All while Anna lay in her hospital bed, barely able to defend herself. In this episode, we are going to dive deep into what happened in Ofstad versus Sarconi, the case that would bring this unsettling family drama into the Colorado courts. We will uncover the tragic dynamics that led Anna to sign a new will under the shadow of pressure, pain, and betrayal. But this is more than just a legal battle over assets. This case raises critical questions about vulnerability, trust, and the power of influence. So listen closely, because by the end of this episode, I want you to ask yourself this. When someone takes advantage of a person's weakened state, especially someone with their own family, where do we draw the line between moral betrayal and criminal manipulation? The court's decision here may have provided a legal answer, but the emotional toll and public debate over this case are far from resolved. All right, imagine this. You are elderly, you are hospitalized, and facing the limitations of age and illness. Your ability to make decisions is not what it used to be, and you find yourself relying on family members who, by all rights, should be there to protect you. But what if that trust, the bond that's supposed to be your safeguard, is twisted into something sinister? What if those closest to you see your vulnerability not as a call for compassion, but as an opportunity? That's precisely the situation that Anna Sarconi found herself in. Her weakened state made her an easy target. Her son William took full advantage, allegedly pressuring her to rewrite her will, cutting her granddaughter Margie Ann out, and redirecting everything in his favor. This was not just a financial maneuver. This was a calculated attempt to erase Anna's original wishes. To anyone watching from the outside, the question becomes painfully clear. At what point does influence become manipulation? And when does manipulation cross the line into a criminal act? In today's episode, we are not just exploring a battle over an inheritance. We are delving into a moral maze, one that asks us to consider the weight of influence within a family. What should happen when that influence turns exploitative? And how does the court determine whether a family member's persuasion was merely self-serving or genuinely abusive? Again, this is a case where finding motive, it's hard to get into the human mind. We're dealing with the psyche again. What was going through everyone's minds? What did the son really want to do? Well, ultimately, the Colorado Supreme Court found William's influence over his mother to be undue. So extreme, in fact, that it rendered Anna's altered will invalid. But this case has left us with lingering questions. Can the law truly capture the depth of betrayal Anna experienced? Again, we're dealing with the law versus the mind. Or was justice served in a way that only scratches the surface of the family's fractured trust? Did the law do its total job? Was it there in time? And can it always? Stick with me as we examine how this case unfolded, what the court considered, and why Ofstad versus Sarconi has remained a striking example of the legal limits of influence. Was justice truly served here? Or does this case reveal a darker side of familial loyalty that even the courts struggle to fully address? Family court, we know this. Families and court, it goes on and on. And now imagine this. This is your family. And not only is it upsetting enough, but now you're in the public eye. The media coverage of Ofstad versus Sarconi quickly transformed what might have been a private family matter into a public spectacle. Stories emerged painting William Sarconi as a cold, calculating son who took advantage of his own mother's fragile state for personal gain. Headlines labeled him as a manipulator, someone willing to sacrifice family bonds for financial benefit. These depictions tapped into a deeply emotional aspect of the case, inviting readers to question how far a family member might go to secure a financial advantage. This framing also stirred up public sentiment, with many seeing William's actions not only as unethical, but also profound and heartless. The public perception of William as a villainous figure was reinforced by selective details. Media outlets often focused on William's frequent hospital visits, which rather than being seen as compassionate, they were depicted as calculated opportunities for control. Stories emphasized his role in pressuring Anna to sign a new will, with reports describing her frail, independent state, all under the shadow of her son's influence. So all of that is going on. And by the time the case reached its verdict, William was seen by many, not just as a family member looking after his own interests, but he became a symbol of betrayal, of the darker side of familial relationships. This portrayal of William and the case, more broadly, also prompted discussions on the media's role in shaping narratives around family and trust. Some questioned whether the coverage was too quick to demonize him without exploring more nuanced aspects of the family dynamics. We all know that every single family out there has unique family dynamics, and you really need to be a part of the family to really understand it. After all, elder care and inheritance decisions, they can often be complex, and motives aren't always purely self-serving. And this all led to debates about how media sensationalism can distort public opinion, especially when it comes to cases involving nuanced family matters. Was William a manipulator? Or had the media painted him as one, without acknowledging the inherent complexities? The power of the media to shape public perception is undeniable, particularly in cases like this. By focusing on select details and omitting others, the media played a very big role in setting the tone for how the case was perceived by the public. For many, the court's ruling against Williams seemed like a necessary correction, a validation of the narrative they had been following. But for others, it raised questions about fairness and the broader impact of media-driven narratives on justice. When the media creates a story that aligns so closely with public fears and emotions, it becomes harder to separate fact from sensationalism. And in a way, when you're doing that, you're putting the entire public in that state, and they're responding as they would. It's a pretty genius way to get a narrative out there. One of the most significant issues Ofstad and Sarconi brought to light here was the question of how well or poorly the legal system protects elderly individuals from manipulation and undue influence. Anna Sarconi's case underscored a troubling reality. Many seniors rely on family members for care and decision-making in their later years, often without sufficient legal protections to ensure their autonomy is respected. This case prompted public discourse on the vulnerability of elderly individuals and whether existing laws are equipped to shield them from the pressures that can arise even from those closest to them. As the details of Anna's situation emerged, it became clear that her declining health had placed her in a compromised position, one that made her susceptible to external influence. And this aspect of the case raised unsettling questions for families and legal professionals alike. How could someone in such a vulnerable state be fully protected from undue pressure? And, equally important, how could the legal system distinguish between genuine care and manipulation when the line between them is so often so thin? The Ofstad versus Sarconi case underscored that while there are laws to address undue influence, these laws are not always applied consistently or effectively in protecting the elderly. This case also drew attention to gaps in elder law and the need for stronger safeguards to prevent cases like Anna's from occurring in the first place. Critics argued that the court's ruling, though favorable to Anna's wishes, highlighted a lack of preventative measures available to protect elderly individuals before exploitation even occurs. For instance, legal advocates proposed implementing clearer guidelines for assessing cognitive capacity in will and estate decisions, and suggested regular check-ins for elderly individuals who are isolated or heavily reliant on a single family member for support. These proposed changes could provide a framework to ensure that elderly individuals are not exploited, especially in situations where they may be susceptible to undue influence from family members. This case also highlighted how cultural values around family care can sometimes complicate legal protections for the elderly. Society often assumes that family members will act in the best interest of their loved ones, a belief that can mask potentially exploitative situations. However, Ofstad versus Sarconi served as a reminder that assumptions about family loyalty can be dangerous when they leave vulnerable individuals unprotected. For many, this case illustrated the need for a more robust legal framework that recognizes the unique challenges facing elderly individuals and ensures that their rights and intentions are preserved, even when family is involved. In the wake of Ofstad versus Sarconi, calls for elder law reform gained traction, with advocates pushing for legislative changes that would better define and address undue influence. This case revealed the urgent need for such reforms, not only to protect the assets of elderly individuals, but also uphold their right to make independent decisions free from coercion. The legal system, in the eyes of many, has a responsibility to close these gaps, ensuring that cases like Anna's are less likely to occur in the future. Perhaps one of the most unsettling aspects of Ofstad versus Sarconi lies in the ethical questions it raised about family influence and loyalty and the boundaries of care. This case forced people to confront a troubling reality. Sometimes those we trust the most, are capable of manipulation under the guise of family loyalty. William's alleged actions toward Anna became a public example of how family relationships, often seen as sacred and safe, can also be exploited, particularly when one party is in a position of vulnerability. For many, this case struck a deep emotional chord, as it brought to light the fragility of family bonds under financial pressure. The ethical dilemma here is complex. While family members often step in to manage the affairs of elderly relatives, at what point does such involvement become interference? Public reaction to this case revealed a split. Some believed that William's actions were a clear betrayal, while others felt that family influence is natural and even necessary in certain situations, especially when an elderly relative requires assistance. This division highlighted an uncomfortable truth. Family members are often expected to support each other, but without clear ethical boundaries. This support can quickly morph into control. Beyond the immediate impact of this case, it ignited broader discussions on how society views the roles and responsibilities of family members in elder care. Should family members have a say in an elderly relative's estate decisions if they're primary caregivers? Or should autonomy always be the priority, even if it means potential financial and logistical challenges for those providing the support? These questions resonated with people who may not have personally experienced this type of family conflict, but could understand the delicate balance between offering help and respecting independence. The case brought to attention the need for clearer ethical guidelines when it comes to family influence, especially in cases involving inheritance and financial decisions. This ethical dilemma was compounded by the legal finding of undue influence, which blurred the line between loyalty and manipulation. While William's defense argued that he was simply fulfilling a role of care, the court's decision indicated that his influence went beyond support, yet the ethics remain murky. If family members are expected to assist their elders, how do we determine when that assistance crosses the line into coercion? How do we know if that person really does know best? We're not in that family. This case illustrates the challenges in defining undue influence overall, and here in personal terms, that the law often struggles to capture, leaving room for public debate on whether family involvement should be closely scrutinized, or if it's simply an unavoidable aspect of elder care. Ultimately, Ofstad versus Sarconi left an indelible mark on public opinion regarding family influence and inheritance matters. People were compelled to examine their own family relationships and consider how they might handle similar situations. Could any family truly be immune to such pressures? And in a society where family involvement is both a cultural and ethical expectation, is it even possible to ensure that an elderly individual's choices are genuinely their own? This case served as a reminder that family, while a source of support, can also introduce complex, ethical questions that the law alone may not be able to answer. Okay, let's go over the facts presented in court, but first, let's go over the key findings regarding William Sarconi in the end. So here's what they found about William, what he had done. Number 1, initiation of will preparation. So William contacted his personal attorney to prepare a new will for his mother, which altered the distribution of her estate to favor her 4 children equally, and thereby that excluded her granddaughter. Now, at the time of the will's execution, Anna Sarconi was hospitalized with severe health issues, including heart disease, high blood pressure. Medical testimony indicated she was in a state of mental confusion as well, and she was highly medicated. The will was executed while Anna was under an oxygen tent, and evidence suggested she was without her hearing aid, rendering her unable to hear. During the signing, William instructed his mother to do whatever Ted, who is the attorney, tells you to do. So he gave her a directive rather than a voluntary act, if you will. And then William kept the existence of this new will a secret from his sister, Elizabeth, until after their mother's burial. That was approximately 2 months later. The courts found that these actions, particularly the preparation and execution of the will under William's direction while his mother was in a compromised mental and physical state, raised significant concerns about undue influence. The court emphasized that undue influence is often proven through circumstantial evidence, especially when a confidential relationship exists and the influencer benefits from the will's provisions. Consequently, the court reversed the lower court's decision and remanded the case for a new trial, allowing the question of undue influence to be considered by a jury. And let's move on to that. To understand how this case escalated into a courtroom battle, we first need to know more about Anna. Let's get into more about her family dynamics and the unsettling context of her later years. Anna was a woman of conviction, a grandmother who valued family above all else. Her estate was modest but meaningful, and she'd long intended it for her granddaughter, Margie Ann Ofstad. She wanted her to inherit it. This decision wasn't arbitrary. It was a promise born out of love and the deep connection that she felt with Margie Ann, who had been a constant presence in her life. As Anna grew older, her health began to decline, which only intensified her reliance on her family. But this dependency, rather than inspiring compassion, it opened a dangerous door for exploitation. In 1949, while Anna was hospitalized and weakened, she was approached by her son, William. And he wasn't a stranger. He wasn't an outsider. He was her own blood, and she trusted him, and she believed he would look out for her best interest. But instead, he allegedly used her deteriorating condition to pressure her into revising her will, shifting her assets away from Margie Ann and into his own control. So that original will was drafted in 1946, and it was simple. Anna's estate would pass to her granddaughter. Yet by 1949, 3 years later, while Anna was under William's influence, this new will emerges. This document divided the estate among her 4 children, effectively eliminating Margie Ann. Now, I've explained that, but here's where things get complicated. Anna's health wasn't just declining. Her physical and mental capacity were both reportedly compromised, making her especially vulnerable. And witnesses later testified that she was not in a state to even make such a significant legal decision independently. And when Margie Ann learned of the revised will, she was devastated, not only by the loss of her inheritance, but by the deeper betrayal this new document represented. Her grandmother's intentions had been clear. The 1946 will was her true wish. Margie Ann believed that William's actions had overridden Anna's autonomy and manipulated her into making a choice she would never have made in a clearer state of mind. So Margie Ann decided to challenge the 1949 will in court, initiating a legal battle that would bring to light the troubling nature of William's influence. The Colorado Supreme Court took on the case, which centered around whether Anna's decision was made freely, or was it a result of undue influence. Central to this decision were several key factors: the confidential relationship between Anna and William, the timing and circumstances of the will's revision, and Anna's compromised condition. The court scrutinized evidence showing that William had substantial opportunity to exploit his mother's trust, especially given her weakened state. Statements from witnesses detailed Anna's frailty and her growing dependency on William during her hospitalization, creating an environment ripe for manipulation. And ultimately, the court deemed William's influence undue, concluding his actions went beyond mere persuasion. This influence was so powerful, so persistent, that it undermined Anna's true intentions, rendering the 1949 will invalid. And this ruling wasn't just a legal victory for Margie Ann. It was a profound acknowledgement of Anna's vulnerability and the moral failings of those around her. But this decision also raised significant questions about family dynamics and the protections, or lack thereof, afforded to elderly individuals who rely heavily on their family members. Was this purely a case of familial betrayal, or did William's influence cross into criminal territory? This case remains a striking example of how family trust can be twisted into a tool for control. For many, the court's decision to reinstate the original will, it seemed just. But then, of course, there's others. There always are, and they were left wondering if the legal system went far enough in addressing the emotional damage and the deeper ethical concerns that came into light because of this case. It's the kind of case that leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and it makes you feel like, can't something be done? Can't this be better? It bothers us. Well, ultimately, the Colorado Supreme Court sided with Margie Ann, and in its decision, the court acknowledged that undue influence often resides in a gray area, where family loyalty and personal gain can intersect. However, in this case, the evidence suggested that Anna's free will had been compromised, leading to the invalidation of the 1949 will. And the court's ruling reinforced the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals, all vulnerable individuals, even from family members. It's a concept we still struggle with, but sometimes people do need protections from family. This case did get ruled, but even with this ruling, it still had unresolved questions about legal boundaries for family care and influence. For some, the court's intervention provided justice for Anna's original wishes. But for others, it raised questions about the difficulties and the intricacies of family loyalty and the role of law in personal relationships. In the end, Ofstad versus Sarconi underscored that while the legal system can correct certain injustices, it certainly cannot repair the deeper emotional scars left by a betrayal of family trust. And this isn't really only a case about a dispute over inheritance. It's an example of how trust and dependence and familial loyalty can be manipulated to serve self-interest, and this all reveals that darker side of family dynamics. Let's look at 5 aspects of this case that reveal how such a betrayal like this is uniquely troubling, because family stuff just is. 1, there's a breach of trust. Family relationships are built on a foundation of trust, especially in moments of vulnerability. Anna Sarconi likely never doubted that her son William would act in her best interest. This trust became a vehicle for exploitation. When family members violate this trust, it is not just a legal violation. It's a moral wound that shakes the very core of family bonds. How about this? Dependence turned against them. Aging, it often brings with it a need for care. It makes elders particularly reliant on family for support. And this dependence creates a relationship dynamic where naturally the elderly individual becomes vulnerable. In Anna's case, her dependence on William for daily support and comfort was ultimately weaponized, transformed from a source of safety into a gateway for control. Situations like this reveal a disturbing reality. The very structures meant to protect individuals in their later years can sometimes become the avenues through which they are most easily harmed. Then you have those blurred lines between care and control. Family caregiving, especially for aging parents, it often involves a delicate balance between guidance and respect for autonomy. This case demonstrates how thin that line can be and how easily it can be crossed. William's presence in Anna's life, under the guise of care, ultimately had the effect of swaying her decisions, calling into question where genuine support ends and manipulation begins. This blending of roles leaves room for ethically troubling actions to be hidden beneath seemingly well-intentioned gestures. William's frequent visits and conversations with his mother, it may have appeared compassionate, but as the case unfolded, they took on a much darker meaning, forcing us to ask, When does guidance cross a line into coercion? Then, of course, you have the legal challenges in proving influence. This is a challenge every time. Cases involving undue influence are notoriously difficult to prove in court, as influence itself is an abstract concept that can be hard to quantify. The court's task in Ofstad versus Sarconi involved parsing out the subtle, often unspoken ways family influence operates, which is no easy feat. Evidence in such cases often relies on witnesses and testimonies, patterns of behavior, psychological assessments, leaving the court to interpret actions that may feel morally wrong, but fall into a legal gray area. And then, of course, we have the psychological cost of family betrayal. Perhaps one of the heaviest aspects of cases like these is the emotional toll that's left behind, affecting everyone involved in ways the court cannot address. A betrayal by a family member leaves scars that can persist for a lifetime, impacting relationships, family bonds, and individuals' senses of trust. For Anna, the pain of being influenced in her final years may have been immense, especially as she would realize that her own son had allegedly acted against her wishes. Try to imagine. And then there's Margie Ann. The damage is twofold. Not only was she supposed to lose what her grandmother had intended for her, but she also had to confront the reality of betrayal within her own family. Even with the favorable ruling, the psychological wounds that were inflicted by this case likely extended far beyond the courtroom, leaving lasting damage that no legal remedy could fully heal. And together, these 5 elements reveal a side of family dynamics that we don't often consider or like to look at, a side where the people we trust the most hold the power to either uplift us or compromise our autonomy. The case of Ofstad versus Sarconi reminds us of the double-edged nature of familial relationships. They can be sources of love and care, but they can also carry the potential for great harm. This dark reality forces us to confront the complexities of family loyalty, especially when financial stakes and personal vulnerabilities come into play. Ultimately, it's a cautionary tale about the limits of trust and the need for safeguards to protect those who are most at risk. And that about wraps this case up. This case, more than a will or family inheritance, this was about the delicate balance of power and trust and influence within families. How easily these bonds can be tested and how devastating the consequences can be when trust is broken. The court's ruling may have provided a legal resolution, but the broader questions remain for each one of us to consider. When we talk about family, we often assume loyalty, and we assume protection comes first. But what happens when that loyalty crosses into territory that feels less like care and more like control? At what point does a family member's guidance become undue influence? And if our loved ones are vulnerable, how do we protect them without stripping away their autonomy? These are questions that remain extremely difficult to answer, even with the benefit of hindsight. I turn this over to you to see if you can make a decision on what you think about what happened here. Anna was someone who had dedicated her legacy to her granddaughter. Yet in her most fragile moments, that legacy was redirected by a family member she trusted. And the court ruled that this influence was undue. But how would we respond in our own families? What would happen beyond the court? Could we say with confidence that we would recognize when genuine care begins to shift toward manipulation? Or now, after something like this, do you turn on all of your family members and start wondering? Can you see it, or can you only wonder? As you reflect on Anna's story, consider the broader implications for society as well, because cases like this remind us that family dynamics can be as complex as any legal proceeding, and that sometimes people closest to us can wield the greatest influence over our lives, and that can be for better or for worse. This isn't an easy case to reconcile. And cases like this, and thoughts like this, and situations like this that are not black and white are hard to deal with because we want answers. And sometimes we don't get them. Perhaps something like this is meant to leave us with questions more than answers. But what do you think? Did the court make the right decision in restoring Anna's original will? Or was this simply a case of family interference that was blown out of proportion? Should family stuff ever end up in court? Some people think it shouldn't. Was justice truly served here? Or does this case reveal limitations in a way our legal system handles family influence and elder protection? These are questions only you can answer, and perhaps there's no single right answer. But cases like this remind us that the law may only reach so far, while the impact of family influence can echo much deeper. Thank you for joining me in exploring this case, and joining me in True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. Stay safe out there. Think critically. And as always, consider the complexities of justice in the world around us. Until next time, this is Alexis Knight.